Kia ora. Hello. Haere mai. Welcome. Welcome to economics. If you're in the right place and you're watching the right video, this is a course about economics. And at its very basic or fundamental level, economics is about two things. Human wants are assumed to be unlimited. And by unlimited, I mean they're never ending. I ate breakfast this morning, I'm hungry again at lunchtime. So even though my wants or desires can be satisfied for a moment or for a period of time, they cannot be definitively satisfied. So we say that in more mathematical terms, they're infinite, or they're insatiable. Note the T here is silent, so it's not insatiable, but insatiable, which basically means cannot be satisfied. On the other hand, resources that make the goods and services that satisfy our wants and desires are limited in supply. And so limited, I mean they're scarce relative to our wants. Scarce. Note the pronunciation, the C at the end. It's not scare, it's scarce. So don't forget, especially if you're from Asia, to pronounce the S sound at the end. Scarce. A word we use a lot in economics. It's an adjective, of course. The noun, as you'll see, is scarcity. Another synonym, insufficient, not enough of. And so basically what we're going to be studying is how we use those limited resources to satisfy human wants. And for want of a better definition, you've basically got it in those two elements there. Perhaps you'd like to write a definition to see how well you've understood this slide. Now, we've just been talking about resources, and we need to find out what they are. Write a simple definition and see what they're used for. And in the slide you can see a number of different resources: human resources, natural resources, and man-made resources. And so firstly, to our definition, what is a resource? Well, it's anything used by businesses to produce goods and services. Resources produce goods and services to satisfy consumer needs and wants. So there's their purpose. And we can see a number of resources already pointed out. Can you categorize them into groups? Well, there are actually 4 groups, and we'll see what they are in the next slide. Now, resources are the inputs. Inputs go into producing an output. Inputs produce output. So another word we could use is production. It's a term we tend to use more in macroeconomics when we do the second half of the course. So production, output, goods and services. So resources are the inputs that produce goods and services. Now they're categorized in 4 main groups called the factors of production. And the 4 factors of production, number 1, not in any particular order, but is called land. And land is any natural resource. Labor is any human resource, and capital any man-made resource. One of the easiest ways to recognize capital is just think of machines and things like that. Now, the land, the labor, and the capital is put together, organized by the 4th factor of production. Sometimes the factor of production is called enterprise, Another name that is used is called entrepreneurship. And of course, the business owners are the entrepreneurs. Why? Because they are risk takers. They have to put their money into a business, hoping that they'll get their money back, and plus some more. So they have to pay for the resources, organize them efficiently in order to produce goods and services to sell, hoping to make a profit. So let's move on to our definitions, a bit of a closer look now at land. Land is any natural resource, so it could be the cows, it could be the trees, it could be the grass the cows eat, it could be the air, it could be the water, etc. Now we can divide natural resources into two further categories: renewable and non-renewable. Renewable, of course, can be replaced. So a cow can reproduce and produce a baby cow called a calf. Grass, of course, is eaten by the cow, but it grows again. So many natural resources are replaceable or renewable. But there are other resources that cannot be replaced, and so they're called non-renewable. And probably the most notable non-renewable resources are minerals from the land. And probably the most important mineral that comes from the land through the last century and still in this one is, of course, oil. Because oil is the natural resource that becomes petrol. And of course, petrol is used in all of transport, or most transport. No doubt you heard me greet you in Maori at the beginning of this unit, and it's here I like to pause and take a moment to think about the resources. In the world we live, often we can forget probably that the most important resource is which one? Land, labour, capital, enterprise. In economics, they don't differentiate. All are considered important. But when you meet Maori people, you find that the most important resource is people. And hence the question on the left, he aha te mea nui o te ao. What is the most important thing in the world? He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It's people, it's people, it's people. Now the reason I like to pause and reflect here with students is because many of you are going to get good qualifications and you're going to join businesses and companies, and you're going to eventually, sooner or later, you're going to manage people. And I have found in my life that the best managers are the ones that care for the people who work either under them or the people they work with. It's good to be competent in your job, to be able to carry out the tasks efficiently and effectively, but if you care for the people you work with, they will work much harder for you, because they know that you're not just interested in looking after yourself and achieving your tasks, but also that you're interested in their well-being. So I hope that you always keep this in mind, that the most important thing in the world is people. People, people. E aha te mea nui o te ao. E tangata, e tangata, e tangata. Let's move on now to look at labour. Labour is any human resource used to produce goods and services. And so we've got three there: teachers, fishermen, and miners. Now, which of those depends mainly on labour? They all need labour, but which of them is most dependent on labour to produce. And I would say teacher, even though there is increasing technology being used in teaching. So you have iPads, I have laptops, projectors, all that is in making my job more capital intensive, but essentially, can you imagine education without a human face? In other words, a teacher. So probably of all the factors of all the three occupations shown there, teaching, fishing and mining, probably the most labour intensive production process, the most concentrated on labour, is education. Capital goods are man-made resources used to produce more goods and services. So you can see a truck would be a capital good, computers obviously, and there are many other different types of capital. So when you think of capital, think of technology, think of machines, think of anything man-made in the production process. Two related terms, social capital, that's the capital that belongs to all of society rather than just individual producers. So you could say the roads, the schools, the hospitals, the libraries, all that is operated by the government, and the government is the one that manages it on our behalf. Infrastructure is another term that comes up occasionally. This is the human-made environment, the man-made environment, and again, roads, airports, electricity, water, telephone. One of the best ways to remember the word infrastructure is think of the word network. And you can see above that you've got an electricity network, and so the networks that are necessary, whether it's for water, electricity, transport, telecommunications, all those networks are part of the infrastructure of the economy. Now, we've already looked at the economic problem, and the economic problem is based on two assumptions: that human wants are unlimited, and yet the resources that produce the goods and services that satisfy those wants are limited in supply. And so the problem is that resources are scarce in relation to human wants. And so quite often the economic problem is called the problem of scarcity. Scarcity being the noun, scarce the adjective. And so as a consequence of that, then decisions have to be made about how to allocate scarce resources. Who's going to get them? Who's going to benefit from them? So these decisions or choices have to be made. And so basically, as we'll see, economics is studying how the different groups in society make those choices. So I'll leave you to write a definition in using that information. Here's another way of presenting the problem, the economic problem. We've got only one planet Earth, so representing limited natural resources at least, and we have world population that is increasing rapidly, of course representing unlimited human wants. Now it's interesting to look at the increase. Back here in the 1804, population was beginning to increase steadily. It wasn't a rapid increase, but it was increasing steadily. But then after the 1920s into the 30s, you can see a rapid increase in world population. The word we use in statistics and in economics quite often, is that world population was increasing progressively. And by progressively, it means at an increasing rate. So the percentage change is increasing. We'll come back to that later in the course. Consequently, if there's only one planet Earth representing limited resources, and you were standing looking at this population graph, you would be forced to conclude that resource sources per person, in other words, the average resources, would decrease. And eventually everyone should become poor. Going on those projections there. Well, has that happened? Before answering the question about the future outlook, are you by nature an optimist or a pessimist? So when you look at this glass, do you see a glass half empty or half full? And it's interesting, most people are optimistic, especially when they think about themselves. They have a positive outlook. You say to them, do you think you'll do okay in this course? You'll be all right? Most people say yes. A few say, no, I don't think I'm going to do very well. So they'd be pessimistic. So I want you just to take a couple of minutes to think about yourself and then write a sentence or two to explain why you think you're optimistic or pessimistic. Now back to our economic problem. Remember, we've got a limited resource on planet Earth. There's only one planet Earth that we can use at the moment anyway. Perhaps in the future, with the development of technology and space travel, we will be able to use the resources from other planets, but at the moment we haven't got that technology. So the outlook on the information presented: one limited planet Earth, increasing world population, not only increasing but increasing progressively, then everyone should be getting poorer. And there was an economist called Malthus who believed that all the world's population would increase until everyone would eventually become poor. And the question is, when he was looking at this 2 centuries ago, he could see that the increasing population, that would, of course, begin to increase faster and faster, increase progressively. And so when he looked into the future, this is exactly what he thought. He believed that by now everyone would be poor. Now, when we look at the world's population distribution and income distribution, we know that it's shared out very unequally. Most of the Western countries have most of the wealth and most of the resources and most of the income. And this goes back to historical developments. Remember that Europe, large parts of Europe like Spain, England, France to a lesser extent, England of course, were colonizers. And so by colonizing, like New Zealand was colonized by the English, and basically what that means is that they came to New Zealand, even though the Maori people were here, they decided they wanted New Zealand's resources for themselves. So colonizing was a way of just getting more resources. But if we go back to the basic assumption, is that if resources are limited, there's only a limited amount of land and natural resources, then if somebody takes more, others have less. And we've seen this, that in many of the poorer countries of the world today are ones that have been colonized by much more powerful countries who have got much richer because of that colonization. That hasn't always been the case, but we can say generally is. But that still doesn't really explain why Malthus, his projection about the future state of mankind, hasn't happened. So there must be another factor even more important. It's not that some groups have taken more off others, even though there's truth in that. But there is also a very fundamental reason for the fact that there have been a large number of countries that have experienced economic growth and rising incomes, even when we say resources are limited. And of course, the reason is technology. Technological progress has been huge. And with that development of technology, there's been an increase in productivity. And by productivity, I mean much more is being produced with less resources. So the average output of each worker has gone up. Hugely. And so for this, we need to think about the impact of technology. And we know, for example, in the Industrial Revolution, the major change was where steam power was actually harnessed. So they developed the technology to be able to use steam power to push large pieces of machinery. And that was the forerunner, the precursor to the next major leap in technology. Was not water, but it was oil. Oil was already a resource that was used, but it wasn't widely used. And when they discovered how to refine oil into petrol to make it more combustible and release more energy, then we saw the development of the motor car and the revolution in the transport industry. And these revolutions, these technological breakthroughs, have resulted in a massive increase in output per person. And with that, of course, rising incomes. And then we could also look at the impact of the second industrial revolution, we could call it, and with the development of computers and the impressive increase in output per person has resulted in the last century, also because of the impact of computers on the production of goods and services. And now so many things are computerized, and this technology has produced so much production, extra production. And so when Malthus was writing, he couldn't see the technological breakthroughs that were going to take place. And so while Malthus is still fundamentally right that resources are limited and human wants are unlimited, we have this fundamental problem of scarcity that undergirds and directs how economists think about the world. So I'm going to leave you now to put in the missing words as a way of just thinking about what I've shared. Here's a cartoon that illustrates the economic problem, and on the next slide you've actually got the opportunity to use it to write about the economic problem. And so be sure to refer to the images used in the cartoon as you explain the economic problem. This is an opportunity for you to practice your writing, so use it. Here's another cartoon that again illustrates the economic problem. So pay special attention to the way the world is presented in a large vehicle, and pay also special attention to the words underneath, guzzler, and find out what that word means. And then identify the missing words. Oil is a non-renewable natural resource that's becoming increasingly scarce. Don't forget to emphasize this sound in the scarce. And on the next slide, you are given the opportunity to write about it. So again, use the opportunity to practice your writing. Okay, this is again some more vocab to go with the unit, and again a definition of economics is given below of the economic problem. So pay close attention to the words used: scarce, limited supply, abundant, plentiful. And if these words are new to you, make a note of them in your notebook. This cartoon is a little bit more cynical, a little bit blunter in the outlook. It's entitled A Race to Oblivion. So you'll need to look up that word to understand more about the message of the cartoonist. And I'll leave you to write something. This cartoon is making you think a little bit about the effect of carbon pollution, global warming, and climate change. So I'll leave you to write something about what the cartoonist is trying to tell us. I haven't talked about opportunity cost yet, but the concept is very easy to understand, and we'll be using it to analyze changes in the next unit. But as a concept, it's a consequence. It comes from the fact that we have to make choices. And why do we have to make choices? Because we want lots of things. Human wants are unlimited, but the resources that produce the goods and services to satisfy those wants are limited in supply. Therefore, we've got to make choices. And if we have to make choices, that means we don't get everything we want. We have to give up something in order to get what we most want. And the giving up of the next most attractive choice, our next preference, is opportunity cost. But we'll come back to that. But this diagram here is illustrating it, especially in a phrase that is, or a saying used in the English language is, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So in the cartoon you've got fishermen taking the fish, and you've got the penguins in the sea looking at the fish and thinking, hey, that's our dinner, we were going to eat that. And so this cartoon is looking at the consequences of limited resources. If someone takes more, others will have less. And of course this has huge implications from generation to generation. If one generation of people take more, that means the next generation, ceteris paribus, providing technology doesn't change the picture too much, will have less. So I'll leave you to write a couple of sentences to explain the phrase, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Perhaps another good illustration is the ACG welcome lunch that's put on by the school. Now you don't have to pay anything for that lunch. So it's free for you, but of course somebody pays, and that's ACG. This slide is just a simple way of remembering the main factors of production. And so we're looking at winemaking. And so look at the cartoon, the image, and see how many resources you can identify, and then write a couple of definitions. Now, vocab is hugely important in economics, and especially for many of you because you've never studied business subjects, you've never studied economics in your high schools, and so you're going to have to develop a method of learning the vocab. Like any language, when you come to learn it, your vocab is just basic to the learning of the language. And in economics has a lot of jargon, a lot of specialized words, a lot of words that seem complicated, but in fact the concepts behind them are not. They're quite easy, but your main challenge in the early stages of this course is to learn the vocabulary. And the students who don't learn it are the ones that will not succeed in the course. So it's vital that you learn the vocab. You've got to develop a method where you write down the words and you write down the meaning. Now, if you want it to be an effective way of learning, you need to be able to write the vocabulary as precisely and as briefly as possible. So the word or the phrase in English and the meaning shouldn't be written down in sentences. So sentences, subject, verb, object, and other terminology can be added, like adverbs, etc. But we don't want sentences, because what you want is just to capture the meaning of the word when you see it. And so I highly recommend using your own language as on the meaning side, not again in sentences, but write a word that translates to the idea of the vocabulary that you're looking at. And as your English develops, that you will be able to find similar meaning words to help you recognize what the vocabulary is. But please don't spend hours writing out sentences about the meaning as you look up translators or search on Google for the information. Try and confine yourself as much as possible to writing synonyms, similar meaning words that you recognize, that help you recognize the vocab. Of course, when we get to some definitions, then I'll say memorize those definitions because they're important for the exam. But generally, vocab just enriches your English, and so that when you're reading questions, you better recognize especially the economic terms. So work hard on your vocab. This is very, very important.